Honestly, looking back at the footage, it wasn't even the fines that got to him. It was just the way Brenda tapped that stupid pink laminate clipboard against her manicured thigh while she told him his gait wasn't welcoming enough. Like, I'm sorry his security infringes on your aesthetic nightmare, Brenda, but this is exactly why sovereign justice exists, because sometimes you have to fight petty with absolute, nuclear-grade legal absurdity. Let's get into this one.
The screech was truly magnificent. It was the kind of high-pitched, metal-on-metal wail that sets your teeth on edge and makes every dog within a 3-mile radius start howling at the moon. I was standing at the edge of my driveway in the sweltering, humid soup that passes for air in Savannah, Georgia, watching an angle grinder throw a rooster tail of orange sparks against the setting sun. My beautiful 6-month-old brushed steel and frosted glass gate, a sleek, modern piece of security engineering that had cost me $4,000, was being sliced into scrap metal. And standing right next to me, vibrating with a terrifying mix of smug satisfaction and humidity-induced frizz, was Brenda. Brenda was the president of the Magnolia Springs Homeowners Association. If passive aggression were an Olympic sport, Brenda would be Michael Phelps. Usain Bolt and Simone Biles rolled into one terrifying package, wearing a floral Talbot's dress. "It's for the best, Jack. Truly," Brenda said, her voice a sugary coating over a blade of pure steel. She didn't even look at me. She was staring intently at the sparks. Her eyes narrowed, as if she was mentally calculating the immediate uptick in neighborhood property values with every millimeter of metal cut. "We have to maintain the historical integrity of the community. A modern gate like that? It just sends the wrong message. It's aggressive." "Aggressive, Brenda?" I asked, wiping sweat and metal dust from my forehead. "It's a gate. It slides open. It slides closed. Its entire purpose is to prevent people from stealing my car, which, you might recall, happened to the Millers down the street 2 weeks before I put this up." Brenda let out a small, theatrically exasperated sigh. "We've discussed this, Jack. The Millers left their keys in the cup holder. That's a personal responsibility issue, not an aesthetic one. Your gate, however, is an eyesore. It's cold. It's intimidating. It's not Savannah charm. It looks like something from a corporate research facility. Several neighbors expressed concern that it made the street feel uninviting, like we were hiding something." "I am hiding something," I snapped. "I'm hiding my valuable property from thieves. Listen, the covenants say I can have a security fence up to 6 feet. This is 5.5 feet. It matches the color palette of my house. I followed the rules." Brenda finally turned to look at me, flashing that sickly sweet southern smile that means, "Go die in a hole, bless your heart." She tapped that pink clipboard of hers. "Oh, sweetie, you read the general section. You didn't read the Architectural Review Committee guidelines, Section 4, subsection B. All prominent exterior structures must adhere to the traditional, welcoming antebellum aesthetic of historic Savannah, as determined by the subjective discretion of the ARC. And the ARC, meaning me, Gary, and Sarah, disagrees that industrial steel is welcoming. It is intimidating, hence the violation, hence the $100 a day fine, which you've already accumulated $700 of, by the way. I stared at her. "You're making this up as you go, aren't you? Subjective discretion? That's not a legal standard. And you know, that's just you acting like a dictator because your kids don't call you anymore." Brenda's smile didn't flicker, but her eyes went icy. "The fines start doubling tomorrow, Jack. And if this isn't gone by Friday, we'll send our own crew to remove it and put a lien on your house for the cost. Have a lovely evening." She spun on her heel and marched away, the heels of her wedges clacking against the asphalt in a rhythm that I'm sure spelled out, "I win" in Morse code. I turned back to the guy with the grinder. He had stopped when Brenda left. He looked at me with genuine pity. "You want me to finish the cut, buddy? Or you want to fight this?" "Finish it, Mike," I said, my voice hollow. I watched the final support beam give way. The gate groaned and toppled onto the grass, an expensive corpse. Spent that night staring at the hole in my driveway where security used to be, and I didn't feel defeated. I felt a cold, calculating rage beginning to simmer. I pulled out the HOA covenant binder, a 2-inch stack of paper that dictates everything from the shade of beige your house can be to the acceptable species of turf grass. Brenda wanted to play by the book? Fine. I was going to memorize the whole book, and then I was going to use it to beat her to death with malicious compliance. I spent the next 48 hours marinating in coffee and legal jargon. I didn't just read the current covenants. I traced the history of Magnolia Springs. This neighborhood wasn't actually historic. It was built in 1998, a deliberate simulacrum of old Savannah, a developer's wet dream of stucco and fake gas lamps, as designed specifically for people who wanted to feel Old South without actually dealing with historic preservation laws or plaster walls that cracked if you breathed on them too hard. The ARC guidelines, the subjective ones Brenda was wielding like a broadsword, were where I focused my initial rage. They were, as I suspected, absolute trash from a legal standpoint. Welcoming aesthetic? Subjective discretion? No court in Georgia would enforce that vagueness if challenged. My first instinct was to just sue the HOA, get a judge to declare Brenda a tyrannical menace and reinstate my modern gate. But then I stopped. Sovereign justice isn't just about winning legal battles. That's boring. It's about legal revenge. It's about winning in a way that is so technically correct, so utterly painful to the other party. Masamus that they can't even complain about it because they set the rules. I didn't just want my gate back. I wanted Brenda to suffer. I wanted to build something she would hate with every fiber of her being, and I wanted her to be legally powerless to stop me. I called my buddy, Marcus. Marcus and I went back to high school, and while I went into systems engineering, hence my love for elegant, modern security solutions, Marcus went to law school at UGA. He's now a junior associate at a big firm in Atlanta, specializing in property law and contract disputes. He's the type of guy who reads municipal zoning codes for fun on a Friday night. I knew he was the only one who could help me navigate this minefield of petty bureaucracy. "All right, lay out the battlefield for me, Jack," Marcus said. We were on a video call. He was at his desk, and judging by the bags under his eyes and the empty Red Bull cans visible in the background, he was deep in the grind of associate life. "Tell me exactly what Queen Brenda did, and don't spare the details about her clipboard. I know how much those trigger you." I laid it out. The initial approval, the break-ins, the gate installation, the intimidating fine, and the subjective discretion clause in the ARC guidelines. I sent him the PDFs of the covenants and the specific guidelines Brenda had cited. Marcus didn't laugh. He just put his hand over his mouth and listened intently, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and sighed. "Okay. First of all, Brenda is on incredibly shaky legal ground with that subjective discretion nonsense, and if you took the HOA to court, you'd probably win, especially if you can show you acted in good faith to enhance security after a crime. Courts generally frown upon vague, non-objective aesthetic standards being used to deprive people of the reasonable use of their property." "So I sue?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You can, but you know how HOAs work," Marcus countered. They'll use the community funds, your money, to fight you. They'll stall. They'll appeal. Brenda will make your life a living hell with microaggressions, like fining you $50 because your trash can lid was slightly ajar on pickup day. It'll take a year, and you'll spend 10 grand to get your 4 grand gate back. And even when you win, you have to live next to these people. Is that the play you want? I looked into my screen. Absolutely not. I don't just want to win, Marcus. I want this channel to explode. When I want her to stare at my property every day and know I own her soul with a loophole. I need malicious compliance. I need revenge that is signed, sealed, and legally binding. Marcus laughed, a genuine, tired chuckle. My man. Classic sovereign justice. This is why I love you. All right, let's dig into this garbage binder you sent me. What's our angle? What did Queen Brenda say, exactly? She said your gate was industrial, not welcoming, and not fitting the historical antebellum aesthetic. Correct? Exactly. She wants Savannah charm. She wants history. Marcus was scrolling through the covenants on a second screen. I could see the reflection of the text dancing in his glasses. Suddenly, he paused. Hold on. Jack, go to the covenants, Article 7, Section C. Fences and boundary structures. Are you there? I flipped my physical binder to the tab. Yeah, Section C. Fences and walls must be constructed of brick, stucco, or approved wrought iron, and may not exceed 6 feet in height. Keep reading, Marcus commanded, his voice vibrating with sudden excitement. ARC approval is required. Landscaping must soften the appearance. No, keep going, Jack. Look at the exemptions list. Article 7, Section C, Subsection 3. I scanned down the page. There it was, in the list of things that weren't considered restrictive fences. It was a single sentence, buried beneath paragraphs about hedge height and stone color. My breath caught in my throat as I read it. Nothing in this article shall restrict or limit the placement of freestanding original sculptures or commissioned artworks, and which are exempt from height restrictions and material limitations to promote neighborhood cultural enrichment. I looked at the screen, and Marcus had the biggest, most maniacal grin I'd ever seen on a lawyer. Jack, did you hear that? Tell me what I'm hearing, Marcus. Spell it out. The HOA doesn't restrict art, Marcus said, emphasizing the word. Fences are structures that enclose. Gates are things in fences. But a piece of commissioned artwork, or a freestanding original sculpture, exempt from everything. Exempt from the 6-foot limit. Exempt from material limitations. No brick, no stucco, no wrought iron required. And most importantly, no ARC subjective discretion review. My brain was already calculating, but it was moving too fast. But I need a gate, Marcus, not a statue. Well, my car needs to get in and out. Marcus held up a finger. You are thinking like a common plebeian, my friend. You aren't building a gate. You are commissioning a piece of moving, functional, industrial art. And here's where the nuclear option comes in. Do you remember the class we took in college on art and intellectual property? I know you didn't go into law, but did anything stick? I thought back. Vaguely. Copyright, trademark, patents. Something about artists' rights? VARA, Marcus said. The Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. It's a federal statute. Most people have no idea it exists, but it is brutal. What it means, simplified, is this. When an artist creates a work of visual art, like a sculpture, They retain certain moral rights to that work, even after they sell it to you. Yet the most relevant right is the right of integrity. Under federal law, nobody, not you, not the HOA, not anyone, can distort, mutilate, or otherwise modify that artwork if such an act would be prejudicial to the artist's honor or reputation. And they certainly can't destroy it. I stared at him. The puzzle pieces were slamming together in my mind, creating a picture of beautiful, terrible legal revenge. So, if I hire an actual artist to create a one-of-a-kind original sculpture that just so happens to function as a barrier across your driveway, Marcus finished, it is legally defined as artwork, not a gate. It falls under subsection 3 of their own bylaws, meaning they can't restrict its material, height, or aesthetic. And once it's installed, it becomes a federal offense under VARA for the HOA to touch it, modify it, or force you to remove it. If Brenda even tries, the artist can sue her in federal court for damages to their reputation. It is a legally impenetrable shield of pure spite. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was perfect. It was elegant. It used their rules, federal law, and their own snobbery against them. Brenda wanted cultural enrichment? I'd give it to her. This is it, Marcus. This is the plan. Brenda wants historic Savannah. She wants antebellum aesthetic. I laughed, a low, ominous sound. What's more historic than a castle? What's more Savannah than a structure designed to repel Yankee invaders? We aren't building a gate, buddy. We are building a portcullis. Marcus bust out laughing. A portcullis? Like a medieval castle gate? The iron grid with the big spikes that falls from the ceiling? You're going to put that at the end of your driveway in a suburban Savannah neighborhood? Yes, I said, my voice hardening. It's going to be made of heavy-gauge, intentional rusted industrial iron. It's going to be 10 feet tall, mounted on massive faux stone concrete towers. It's going to be operated by a manual hand-crank windlass that makes a horrifying, loud clank, clank, clank sound with every rotation. When it slams down, the iron spikes are going to sink 2 inches into custom-poured receptacles in the concrete. It is going to be the most intimidating thing Brenda has ever seen. And it will be, technically and legally, a unique, kinetic iron sculpture titled The Duality of Man and Suburbia. Marcus shook his head, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. You're absolutely insane. But the legal theory is sound. And if we document everything correctly, if you actually pay an artist to design and fabricate it, and if that artist is part of the process, the HOA is trapped. It's art, and VARA is their warden. Let's do it. I have some fabrication contacts from my engineering work, I said, already scrolling through my phone. But I need someone who self-identifies as an artist. Someone who can look at a massive piece of defensive military architecture and see cultural enrichment. Good luck, Jack, Marcus said, logging off. This is going to be some content. Just make sure you have good cameras, okay? I want to see Brenda's face when she sees the spikes. Finding the right contractor was the next critical phase of the operation. This couldn't be some guy with a welding torch in his garage. This needed to be a statement. We have a professional whose work was eccentric, undeniably artistic, and preferably someone who had already dealt with the kind of bureaucratic nonsense I was trying to weaponize. After 2 days of dead ends, I found him. Vlad. That was it. Just Vlad. His studio, which was really just a massive, soot-stained industrial warehouse in a shaky part of town near the Savannah River, was a wonderland of metal and fire. I parked my car, and even through the closed windows, I could hear the thump, thump, thump of heavy industrial machinery and the hiss of a plasma cutter. The air smelled of ozone, burnt metal, and old grease. I loved it instantly. This was the exact opposite of Brenda's world of stucco and beige. I walked into the warehouse, and it was overwhelming. There were skeletal metal creatures hanging from the ceiling, as massive 15-foot steel flowers with gears for pedals, and a sculpture of a dragon made entirely of motorcycle chains that looked ready to breathe real fire. In the center of the chaos, wrestling with a massive sheet of what looked like 10-gauge steel, was Vlad. He was a giant of a man, at least 6 feet 5 inches, with a thick beard stained gray with metal dust, arms covered in intricate dark tattoos, and he was wearing a full leather apron that looked like it had survived a war. He didn't notice me. He was in the zone, guiding a plasma torch with surgical precision. I waited for him to finish the cut. He clicked off the gas, lifted his welding mask, and wiped a bead of sweat the size of a marble from his forehead. He saw me and grunted, a sound that wasn't exactly welcoming, but also wasn't aggressive. It was just Vlad. Can I help you?" His voice was deep, gravelly, with a thick, indiscernible accent that sounded vaguely Eastern European, but might just have been from decades of inhaling metal fumes. "You do not look like my usual clients. You do not want a decorative coat rack." "You're right, Vlad. I don't want a coat rack," I said, stepping closer. I looked around the studio, gesturing to the metal madness. "I've seen your work. The dragon outside, the kinetic sculptures. It's incredible. It's unique. It's art, but it has this utilitarian energy to it." Vlad's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded slowly. "Metal is not for pretty things. Metal is for function, for force. I make art that shows this. What is it you want, businessman?" "I want to commission a piece," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I have this property, a large driveway, and I have a problem with intruders. And I have an even bigger problem with a neighbor who believes security is intimidating. I don't want a fence. I want a statement. I want a sculpture. A large-scale, functional, kinetic sculpture. I want it to be a medieval portcullis." Vlad stared at me. His face, usually a mask of stony indifference, twitched. His eyes widened, and a slow, dark grin spread across his face, revealing a gold tooth. He let out a laugh that was more of a deep, rumbling growl. "A portcullis, in the driveway. The iron grate, that drops, thud." He slammed his hand onto the metal table, the noise echoing through the warehouse. "A portcullis. This is genius. This is brutal. This is not for security, businessman. This is for war." "Exactly, Vlad. It's for a very specific type of war. A legal one. And that's where you come in." I pulled out my tablet and showed him the HOA bylaw. "Nothing in this article shall restrict or limit the placement of freestanding original sculptures or commissioned artworks. If I build a gate, she can fine me. But if I hire an artist, a real recognized artist like yourself, to create a functional kinetic sculpture that just happens to block my driveway, she is legally powerless. Under something called the Visual Artists' Rights Act, she cannot touch your work. She cannot tear it down. She cannot deface it." Vlad's grin got even bigger. He grabbed the tablet from me, reading the text, his thick index finger tracing the words. "Cultural enrichment," he muttered, shaking his head. "They do not know what they ask for. Neighborhood cultural enrichment, a medieval engine of war." He looked up at me, as a gleam in his eyes. "I love this plan. It is insane. It is stupid. It is also beautiful." "There are some constraints, Vlad," I said, already nervous about the budget and his artistic vision. It needs to be functional. It needs to have a manual lift system. I want it to make a lot of noise. It needs to look historical. And what's this going to cost me? This isn't a wrought iron gate. Vlad tossed the tablet back onto the metal table, where it landed with a painful-sounding clack. He crossed his massive tattooed arms. Historical? No. Historical is boring. We do better. We make it authentic, but better. I use heavy industrial iron. 10 gauge. We do not paint it. Painting is for cowards. We force the rust process. Acid patina. It will look like it has been in the ground for 500 years. The spikes? And I make them 2 feet long, hand-forged, sharp enough to pierce the engine block of the invading Toyota Camry. The windlass? Yes, manual, heavy chains, gears this big. He held his hands apart, indicating gears the size of a dinner plate. It will scream when it moves. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and terror. This was getting bigger than I had ever imagined. Okay, the aesthetic sounds powerful. What about the logistics? I need to get my car in and out. The neighbors will complain about the noise. Let them complain, Vlad roared, throwing his hands up in the air. It is art. Art is not meant to be quiet. Art is meant to disturb the comfortable. This will disturb them all. Every time you leave for work, clank, 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 thud. Every time you come home, clank, 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 thud. What it is on us, a masterpiece of noise. I started to laugh. This guy was perfect. Okay, Vlad, I'm on board with the disturbance. Now, the hard question. Price. I had a budget for a gate. This is a fortress. What are we looking at? Vlad scratched his beard, the grin fading into a look of serious calculation. He looked at the dragon sculpture, then at a massive forklift in the corner, then back to me. For a standard gate, I charge 6. For an intimidating architectural sculpture that requires custom-engineered gears, forced rust patina, hand-forged spikes, massive chains, and concrete foundation work strong enough to hold up an engine of war? And also I have to deal with your legal papers? This is not a standard job. This is passion project. This is a sculpture I name The Final Defiance. You want this masterpiece? He leaned in close, as the smell of burnt metal and stale tobacco washing over me. $15,000, and that does not include the concrete work or the engineers. 15,000. It was more than 3 times what my previous gate had cost. It was a massive amount of money to spend on a joke. But then I thought about Brenda. I thought about that stupid pink clipboard, the subjective discretion clause, and the $700 in fines that I was still going to have to pay. If I did this, if I went nuclear, I wouldn't just be getting a gate. I'd be buying a piece of property in Brenda's brain, rent-free, for as long as I lived there. Every time that portcullis slammed down, a piece of her soul would die. It's a deal, Vlad, I said, extending my hand. He took it, and his grip was like being caught in a hydraulic press. He didn't just shake my hand, and he crushed it. Good choice, businessman. We make the neighborhood culturally enriched. Now give me your phone. We need to document the start of this artistic process. You said your lawyer needs proof this is a commission for an original work of art? I gave him my phone, and for the next hour, Vlad transformed from an eccentric blacksmith to a media-savvy artist. We filmed the initial consult. I am Vlad, and this is Jack, he said to the camera, his gravelly voice booming through the warehouse. He was holding a piece of charcoal and sketching an absolutely terrifying structure on a huge piece of cardboard. Jack is a man who understands art. He has a simple request, a sculpture for his property, a statement of security and history. Together we are creating the duality of man, a modern portcullis. It is not a gate. And a gate is a suggestion. A portcullis is a command. It will show the neighbor the beauty of industrial force and historical defense. I will use only the finest iron. I will make the spikes, and I will make the chains. This is my vision, and Jack is my patron. Witness the artistic birth. He finished the sketch, and it was brutal. The concrete support towers were depicted as looking like they'd been built with chunks of a medieval fortress, and the portcullis itself had iron bands that looked like they could withstand a cannonball. He'd even added some stylized, angular gargoyles near the top windlass mechanism, claiming they were essential structural elements to ensure proper balance and distribution of weight, while also providing traditional protective energies. "There," Vlad said, tossing the charcoal aside. "The design is complete. But now, we sign the documents your lawyer friend prepared." We went into his office, a tiny dirt-stained room with a desk that was just a piece of plywood resting on 2 barrels. Marcus had sent over a very specific commission agreement and VARA waiver. The commission agreement was straightforward. I was hiring Vlad to create an original sculpture, The Duality of Man, as a unique, one-of-a-kind work of visual art. It detailed the materials, the rough dimensions, and the function as a kinetic element. The VARA paperwork was the crucial part. It was a dense legal document where Vlad officially declared this was a work of visual art, as defined by 17 U.S.C. Section 101. It stated that he, as the artist, did not waive his moral rights under VARA. He retained the right to prevent any intentional distortion, mutilation, in or other modification of that work which would be prejudicial to his honor or reputation. And it specifically mentioned that the owner of the property where the sculpture was installed, me, and any relevant governing bodies, the HOA, could not destroy the work. Vlad signed with a massive flourish, the pen almost tearing the paper. I signed. Then we filmed a final segment with both of us holding the signed documents in front of the charcoal sketch. "The contract is signed," Vlad said to the camera, his arm around my shoulder, squeezing the breath out of me. "The artist and the patron are united. This is visual art. It is protected by the full power of the United States law. If any person, any Karen, tries to touch this sculpture, they will have to answer to me and to the federal government. Culture is coming to Savannah." "Zdorowie." He pulled a bottle of vodka from a hidden drawer in his desk and took a massive pull, then offered it to me. "Zdorowie, Vlad," I said, wincing at the harsh burn. Culture is coming. The next week was a blur. My concrete crew, a group of very confused guys I had previously used for a simple patio installation, arrived. I showed them the site plan. I'd had an actual structural engineer draw up the plans for the 2 massive 12-foot concrete support towers. The crew looked at the blueprints, and then at me. "You want us to pour concrete towers, with internal steel reinforcement cages strong enough to hold up a car, in your driveway?" the foreman asked, scratching his head. "To look like an ancient fortress?" "Exactly," I said, showing him the sketches and the materials list. "I have a specific stucco blend from Atlanta. It's got a heavy mineral texture. I've ordered 15 gallons of acid stain. The base texture should be rough, almost like ancient, pockmarked stone. Think dungeon, but, chic." The concrete guys were professionals, but I could tell they thought I was having some kind of psychiatric break. They started digging, and immediately the conflict began. Magnolia Springs, like most modern subdivisions, has strict rules about construction noise, work hours, and unsightly materials. They were 4 hours into the job when Brenda appeared. She didn't march this time. She was almost a blur, a floral whirlwind of rage, clutching that pink clipboard so hard I thought it might snap. She stopped at the edge of my property line, where a mountain of rebar and gravel had been delivered. "Jack, what is this? What is going on?" she shrieked, and her voice cracking the humid air. The concrete guys stopped their jackhammering. "We did not approve a new driveway construction. You are digging 4-foot holes where grass is supposed to be. And this rebar, it is unsight. It is dangerous. We are issuing a fine of $250 for unauthorized construction, a fine of $100 for improper storage of construction materials, and a fine of $50 for excessive noise before 9 a.m. I didn't panic. I didn't even yell. I was in a different place now, a higher plane of bureaucratic warfare. I walked slowly to the edge of the property line, carrying my tablet. "Calm down, Brenda. You're going to get heat stroke, and your floral dress is starting to show sweat marks. It is not antebellum chic." Her eyes went wide with pure fury. "How dare you? I am the HOA president! And I am shutting this down!" She turned to the concrete guys. "Stop! Pack up! You are all Actually, Brenda," I interrupted, raising my voice to cut through her screaming. "They are not trespassing. They are my agents, performing authorized cultural enrichment work." I held up the tablet, showing her a PDF file. "You said you were fining me, right? Article 12, Section B, for unauthorized construction. But that applies to structures. Fences, walls, sheds." I scrolled the PDF. "But if you look at Article 7, Section C, Subsection 3, which you might have forgotten when you were telling me about your subjective discretion regarding fences." "Article 7, C, 3, I read with dramatic flair. "Nothing in this article shall restrict or limit the placement of freestanding original sculptures or commissioned artworks, which are exempt from height restrictions and material limitations to promote neighborhood cultural enrichment." I let the words hang in the heavy air. "You said I needed to embrace history, Brenda. You said I needed Savannah charm. Well, I've taken your advice. I've commissioned a massive original iron and concrete sculpture from a recognized artist. It's a statement about the decay of historical defense in the modern era. We call it The Duality of Man and Suburbia. These concrete towers? Not a fence. They are the plinths for the sculpture. And that rebar? It's for structural support. Art requires a strong foundation, Brenda. It's heavy." Brenda's jaw worked, but no sound came out. She looked at the bylaw on the tablet, then at the rebar, then back at me. I could see the wheels in her brain spinning, while desperately trying to find an ARC guideline for too much concrete in art. This is a joke," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "You can't just call 2 piles of concrete and rebar art and get out of the rules, Jack. The ARC has discretion to approve all artwork before it's installed. Guidelines 4, B. No, Brenda. It says the ARC has discretion for structures, walls, and fences. Look at the bylaw again. It literally says, nothing in this article shall restrict or limit placement to promote neighborhood cultural enrichment. Art is exempt. You don't get to review it. That's the whole point. You might not like this particular sculpture, but that is the beauty of subjectivity, Brenda. You find my previous gait intimidating. I find this concrete work profoundly moving. And who are you to tell me my cultural enrichment is wrong?" Brenda was defeated, at least for the day. She didn't write the fines. She just stared at me, her face contorting in a mask of pure, unadulterated loathing. "This isn't over, Jack. You think you're smart? We'll see what the neighborhood says when they have a prison yard in their driveway." She spun and marched away, this time skipping the Morse code heels and just stomping with full floral force. The concrete guys were staring at me like I was a superhero. "Dude, you just quoted HOA bylaws at her until she stopped talking. That was the most badass nerd thing I've ever seen." "This is sovereign justice," I said, winking. "We fight for the little guy, and for the right to build fortified artwork. Now let's get those cages set. Vlad is bringing the iron on Friday, and it's going to be glorious." The rest of that week was honestly a masterclass in psychological warfare. I mean, the concrete had to cure, right? So for 4 days, there were just these two massive, brutalist faux stone monoliths sitting at the end of my driveway, flanking the entrance like the pillars of Hercules, if Hercules shopped at Home Depot and had a vendetta against suburban conformity. Brenda drove past them at least 6 times a day. I know this because my security cameras tracked her white Lexus SUV slowly creeping by, the driver's side window cracked just enough for her to glare at the drying cement. I literally sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, waving every single time. She never waved back. I guess cultural enrichment takes time to digest. Friday morning rolled around, and the humidity in Savannah was already pushing 90% by 8 o'clock. The air felt like hot soup, but I was practically vibrating with excitement. I had my coffee, I had my cameras set up on tripods in the front yard, and I was waiting. Then I heard it. Before I even saw the truck, I heard the groaning, struggling roar of a heavy-duty diesel engine violently downshifting as it turned onto Magnolia Springs Drive. A massive flatbed truck slowly rumbled into view, and it was a spectacle. Vlad wasn't just bringing a gate, he was bringing a siege engine. Strapped to the back of the flatbed was a 15-foot-tall, 10-foot-wide grid of the most terrifying, beautifully rusted iron I had ever laid eyes on. The metal was thick, thicker than I had even imagined, and the bottom of the grid ended in a row of hand-forged, a brutal-looking iron spikes that looked like they belonged on the set of a medieval fantasy show, not a subdivision in Georgia. And the gargoyles. Oh man, the gargoyles. Vlad had welded these abstract, jagged metal beasts onto the upper corners of the grid. They didn't look like traditional stone gargoyles. They looked like angry, mutated engine blocks with wings. It was the most magnificent, intimidating piece of metal I had ever seen. Vlad hopped out of the cab of the truck. He was wearing his leather apron over a stained tank top, a lit cigar clamped between his teeth, looking like a blacksmith who had just conquered a small country. He had 3 guys with him, all equally massive, covered in soot, and carrying heavy chains and welding equipment. "Businessman!" Vlad roared, his voice echoing down the manicured street, when several front doors across the street instantly cracked open. Mrs. Gable, the 80-year-old woman who lived across from me, stepped out onto her porch in her pink bathrobe, her jaw literally dropping. "We bring the art. We bring the duality. It is heavy. It is beautiful. It is ready to crush the spirit of the beige houses." "It's incredible, Vlad," I said, walking up to the flatbed and running a hand over the rough, acid-washed patina of the iron. It felt like history. Angry, tetanus-inducing history. I mean, it's literally perfect. Brenda is going to have an aneurysm. "Who is Brenda?" Vlad grunted, waving his guys over to start unstrapping the massive sculpture. "Is she the patron of the arts? Does she appreciate the kinetic force?" "Oh, she's going to experience the kinetic force, all right," I laughed. "Let's get this thing mounted." For the next 6 hours, my driveway was a construction zone of epic proportions, A small crane had to be brought in to lift the portcullis off the truck. The sound of the diesel engine, the shouting in whatever language Vlad and his crew were speaking, and the sheer, metallic clanging of heavy iron chains drew a crowd. Word had obviously spread through the neighborhood Facebook group, which I was banned from because people started showing up with lawn chairs. A group of teenagers from down the street were standing on the sidewalk, filming the entire process for TikTok, pointing and laughing. "Dude, is that a castle gate?" one of the kids yelled over the noise of the crane. "It's a kinetic sculpture, guys," I yelled back, leaning heavily into the bit. "Son, it represents the socio-economic barriers of modern suburban living." The kids cheered. I was officially the weirdest guy in the neighborhood, and I was loving every second of it. Vlad and his team worked like machines. They hoisted the massive iron grid between the two concrete towers. They had custom fabricated these massive steel tracks that bolted directly into the concrete, allowing the iron grid to slide up and down. Then came the windlass mechanism. This was the pièce de résistance. It was a huge, hand-cranked wooden and iron spool mounted at the top of the towers, connected to the portcullis by thick, industrial chains. It took two of Vlad's guys just to lift the crank handle into place. Around 2 in the afternoon, Brenda finally made her appearance. She didn't drive this time. She walked down the sidewalk, flanked by Gary and Sarah, the other 2 members of the Architectural Review Committee. They looked like a tribunal of suburban doom. Gary was wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt tucked in so tight I'm surprised he could breathe. And Sarah looked like she was actively smelling something rotten. Brenda marched right past the crowd of onlookers, right past the kids filming, and stopped at the yellow caution tape Vlad had strung up. She stared up at the 15-foot iron spikes, the rusted grid, the abstract gargoyles, and the massive chains. Her face went through a fascinating series of colors. Pale white, then a mottled pink, and finally a deep, furious crimson. "Jack," she said, her voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost quiet. "What is that?" "Brenda, Gary, Sarah, welcome!" I walked over, and wiping grease off my hands with a rag. I'm so glad the ARC could make it for the unveiling. What you are looking at is the duality of man, a bespoke, commissioned piece of visual art crafted by the renowned metal sculptor Vlad over there. I pointed to Vlad, who was currently hanging off one of the gargoyles, welding a joint and sending a shower of sparks down onto the driveway. "That is a medieval portcullis, Jack," Gary sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at the iron spikes. "It has spikes! It looks like it belongs on a dungeon! It is a safety hazard! It is a violation of every aesthetic principle this community stands for." "Gary, buddy, you're looking at it through the lens of offense," I said smoothly, channeling my inner Marcus. "You have to look at it through the lens of cultural enrichment. The spikes? And they represent the harsh realities of the outside world piercing the bubble of our curated lives. The rust? It speaks to the decay of traditional neighborhood values. It's provocative. It's meant to start a conversation. And look, it's starting one right now." I gestured to the crowd of neighbors who were watching this exchange like it was prime-time television. "I don't care about your fake art degree jargon, Jack," Brenda snapped, finally finding her volume. "This is a gate. A hideous, oversized, intimidating gate. And it violates the height restrictions, the material restrictions, and the ARC approval process. You have until Monday to take it down, or we are taking you to court. We are fining you the maximum allowable amount, and we are placing a lien on this property." I just smiled, and I slowly reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had printed extra copies of the VARA waiver and the commission agreement just for this moment. I hear your subjective opinion, Brenda, but legally, and I mean under federal law, this is an original work of visual art. I have the commission papers right here. I have the artist's declaration of his moral rights under the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. I handed her the paper. She snatched it, her eyes darting over the legal text. You see, I continued, speaking loudly enough for the cameras and the neighbors to hear, under your own HOA bylaws, Article 7, Section C, art is exempt from all height and material restrictions. You wrote that rule to allow Mrs. Gable to keep that weird 6-foot bronze dolphin fountain in her front yard. But the rule applies to all art. And more importantly, under federal law, you cannot alter, move, or destroy this sculpture without violating Vlad's rights as an artist. If you try to tear this down, you won't be suing me in local civil court over a bylaw. Vlad will be suing the HOA in federal court for statutory damages ranging up to $150,000 for the willful destruction of a recognized work of art. Brenda stared at the paper. Gary looked at Brenda. Sarah looked like she wanted to go home and drink heavily. "This is absurd," Brenda whispered, though the confidence had completely drained from her voice. "You're playing a game." "I'm following the rules you enforced, Brenda," I said, dropping the friendly act. "You said my modern gait was intimidating. You used a subjective rule to fine me and force me to tear down my property. So, I found a rule that you can't touch. Enjoy the culture." Vlad yelled down from the top of the tower. "Businessman, the mechanism is secure. We are ready for the kinetic demonstration." I turned away from the ARC committee and walked up to the massive wooden crank handle attached to the side of the concrete tower. "All right, Vlad, let's show them the duality." I grabbed the heavy wooden handle. It took genuine physical effort to turn it. As I cranked, the massive iron gears engaged with a loud, mechanical clack. The heavy iron chains pulled taut. Clank, clank, clank. The sound was deafening. It was the sound of heavy industry, of raw mechanical power. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive iron portcullis began to rise. It took me a full 2 minutes of sweaty cranking to get it 10 feet in the air, enough to clear my car. I locked the winch mechanism with a heavy iron pin. The crowd was silent. Even Brenda was just staring, horrified and mesmerized. "And now," Vlad announced, standing at the base of the tower like a ringmaster, "the release of tension, the drop of the duality." He reached over and yanked the heavy iron release lever. The pin popped out. Gravity took over. 3,000 pounds of rusted iron and heavy spikes free fell down the steel tracks. The chains screamed as they whipped through the gears. The air displaced by the massive grid hit me in the face. The portcullis hit the custom-poured concrete receptacles at the bottom of the driveway with an impact that literally shook the ground. Kathoom! And a cloud of dust puffed up from the concrete. The heavy iron vibrated, humming with kinetic energy. The sound echoed off the beige stucco houses, ringing down the street like a bomb going off. The teenagers cheered wildly. A dog down the street started barking frantically. I turned back to Brenda. She was clutching her chest, her eyes wide with sheer terror. The spikes were buried 2 inches into the concrete, forming an impenetrable, terrifying wall of rusted iron across my driveway. "I guess it works," I said, grinning. "Have a great weekend, Brenda." Brenda didn't say a word. She just turned and walked away, Gary and Sarah scurrying after her like frightened mice. Vlad came down and clapped me on the shoulder, nearly dislocating it. "It is a masterpiece, Jack. The acoustics are perfect. We have achieved true intimidation through art," I paid Vlad the remaining balance, shook his hand, and spent the rest of the evening sitting on my porch, drinking a beer, and just admiring the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of what I had built. It was glorious. It was the most expensive, ridiculous thing I had ever done, but watching the sunset gleam off those rusted iron spikes, honestly, it felt like money well spent. But I knew Brenda wasn't done. You don't become the president of a Savannah HOA by backing down from a fight, even a federally protected one. I knew she was going to escalate, and I spent the weekend reviewing my security camera footage and keeping my phone close. Monday morning, the escalation arrived, and it had flashing blue lights. I was in my kitchen, making coffee, when the heavy knock, knock, knock rattled my front door. I checked the camera feed on my fridge tablet. Standing on my porch were 2 Savannah Police Department officers. Behind them, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and a look of triumphant vindication on her face, was Brenda. I took a deep breath, grabbed my coffee mug, and opened the door. "Morning, officers. What can I do for you?" The older officer, a guy with a thick mustache and a name tag that read Miller, looked at me, then looked past me, staring down the driveway at the massive iron structure. He slowly took off his sunglasses. "Sir, is that a castle gate in your driveway?" "No, Officer Miller," I said politely, stepping out onto the porch. "That is a culturally enriching, what kinetic oscillation sculpture titled The Duality of Man. It was commissioned and installed last week." The younger officer, who looked like he was fresh out of the academy, was openly staring at the gargoyles, trying very hard to suppress a smile. "It's got spikes, man. Big ones." "Yes, it does," I nodded. "They represent the harsh realities of the world. It's an artistic statement." Officer Miller sighed, pulling a notepad from his pocket. "Right. An artistic statement. Well, sir, we received a call from Ms. Brenda here, representing the HOA. She stated that you have constructed an illegal, unpermitted barricade that poses a severe safety hazard and violates local zoning ordinances. She's requesting we issue a citation and mandate immediate removal, citing it as a public nuisance and a danger to the community." Brenda stepped forward, and practically glowing. "It is a hazard, officer. If a child were to walk under that thing when it fell, it would be catastrophic. It's an illegal structure, and he built it purely to harass the neighborhood." "Honestly, Brenda, if a child is wandering onto my private property and playing with a heavy-duty industrial winch mechanism without my permission, we have a trespassing issue, not a zoning issue," I countered smoothly. I turned my attention back to the cops. "Officers, I understand why you were called, but this is entirely a civil matter. This structure is not a gate. It is legally classified as a work of visual art. I have the commission papers, and it is protected under the Federal Visual Artists' Rights Act. Furthermore, it is situated entirely on my private property, well behind the county easement line." I walked over to the edge of the porch and pointed to a small, brushed bronze plaque that Vlad had insisted we rivet to the side of the concrete tower. "If you look right there, you'll see the title, the artist's name, and the copyright information. The HOA's own bylaws state that commissioned artworks are exempt from their restrictions." Officer Miller walked over to the plaque. He read it. He looked up at the rusted iron, the massive chains, the spikes embedded in the concrete. He reached out and tapped the iron grid. It didn't budge. It was solid as a rock. He turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, he's right. This is on private property. It's not blocking the sidewalk. It's not blocking the street. It's secured. And if you have an issue with the aesthetics, or whether it violates your specific neighborhood rules, that's a civil dispute between you, the homeowner, and the HOA board. The police department doesn't enforce HOA covenants." Brenda's face fell. "But But it's a hazard. It's a portcullis. It's a heavy piece of metal, ma'am, Officer Miller corrected gently. But it's pinned and secured. Unless he's actively dropping it on people, it's not a criminal safety issue. It's a civil code enforcement issue at best, and even then, if he's claiming it's protected art, that's for a judge to decide. Not us. He put his notepad away. We can't order him to tear it down. We don't carry battering rams in the cruisers. You're going to have to take this to civil court. The younger officer couldn't hold it in anymore, and he let out a sharp snort of laughter, quickly turning it into a cough. Sorry. Allergies, he muttered. Have a good day, folks, Officer Miller said, tipping his hat to me. They walked back to their cruiser, and I swear I saw the younger cop taking a picture of the portcullis with his personal phone before they drove away. Brenda stood on the sidewalk, entirely alone. Her grand police intervention had failed spectacularly. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it could have melted the iron. You think you've won, Jack, she hissed. You think you can just hide behind some loophole? But this neighborhood doesn't want you here. We don't want your art. I will find a way to get rid of that monstrosity if it's the last thing I do. I look forward to the cultural exchange, Brenda, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. And she stomped away, and I went back inside. I knew she was desperate now. She had played the HOA fine card, she had played the police card, and both had failed. When a narcissist loses control, they don't give up. They do something stupid. I called Marcus and gave him the update. She's going to try and remove it herself, Marcus said immediately. His voice was sharp, professional. She knows a legal battle over VARA will take months and cost the HOA thousands in legal fees, and she might lose. She's going to try self-help. She's going to hire someone to come tear it down. Can she do that? I asked. Legally? Absolutely not. It would be trespassing, vandalism, destruction of private property, and a massive federal violation of the artist's moral rights, but practically, yes. As if she gets a tow truck out there in the middle of the night and rips it down, the art is gone. You could sue her into oblivion afterward, but the portcullis would be destroyed. So what do? You keep your cameras rolling, Jack, and you set an alarm. If anyone touches that iron, you need to be out there. I didn't sleep much that week. I set my security system to push an aggressive, loud alarm to my phone if motion was detected in the driveway between midnight and 6 a.m. Tuesday and Wednesday night were quiet. Just a stray cat and a raccoon. But Thursday night was the climax. It was 2:15 a.m. My phone erupted with the sound of a blaring siren. I jolted out of bed, heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed my phone, opening the camera app. There, in the grainy black and white night vision, was a heavy-duty, a flatbed tow truck with a massive rear winch backing slowly into my driveway. The truck had no logos, and the license plate was obscured by mud. A guy in a dark hoodie jumped out of the cab, carrying a thick steel tow chain. He was walking straight toward the portcullis, and standing on the sidewalk, wrapped in a dark trench coat over her pajamas, looking nervously up and down the street, was Brenda. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I muttered. She had actually done it. She had hired a rogue tow truck to rip down federal art in the dead of night. I threw on my bathrobe over my boxers, shoved my feet into my slippers, and grabbed my phone. I dialed Marcus immediately and put him on speakerphone. He picked up on the second ring, sounding groggy. "Marcus, it's happening. Tow truck in the driveway. Brenda is here. I'm going out." "I'm awake. I'm recording the call. Do not get physical, Jack. Just inform them of the law. Let them hang themselves." I threw open the front door and marched out into the humid, muggy night air. The tow truck driver had just wrapped the thick steel chain around one of the lower iron bars of the portcullis and was hooking it back onto itself. He was getting ready to yank the whole structure, concrete tracks and all, right out of the ground. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking through the quiet neighborhood. "Step away from the sculpture!" The driver jumped, dropping the hook. He looked at me, then looked at Brenda on the sidewalk. Brenda froze, deer in headlights, pulling her trench coat tighter. "What's the problem, buddy?" the driver said, trying to sound tough. "HOA authorized a removal of an illegal barricade. I'm just doing a job." "You are trespassing on private property," I said, walking down the driveway, my bathrobe flapping in the slight breeze. I held up my phone, making sure the camera was pointing at both of them. "And you are about to attempt the destruction of federally protected visual art. Are you familiar with the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990? The driver looked confused. "The what?" "Look, lady," he turned to Brenda. "You said you had the paperwork for this." "I am the HOA president," Brenda shouted, stepping forward, her desperation making her voice shrill. "It's an illegal structure. Pull it down, Gary. I'm paying you in cash." Gary, the tow truck driver, of course. "Gary, listen to me very carefully," I said, projecting my voice so Marcus could hear clearly on the speakerphone. "My name is Jack. This property belongs to me. That structure is a commissioned artwork titled The Duality of Man. It is protected under 17 U.S.C. Section 106A. If you engage that winch and damage that iron in any way, you are committing a federal offense. You will be sued for statutory damages that could exceed $100,000, and I will personally see to it that your towing license is revoked." "He's lying!" Brenda shrieked. "It's a gate! Just pull it!" Gary looked at the massive, terrifying iron structure. He looked at the heavy chains. Then he looked at the concrete towers. He wasn't an idiot. He knew that pulling that thing down was going to tear up the driveway, make a massive amount of noise, and probably damage his truck if it snapped back. And the words federal offense and $100,000 clearly spooked him. "Look, man," Gary said, and holding his hands up, "I don't want no federal heat. She just said it was an HOA repo." "It's not," I said flatly. Suddenly, a massive, dark shadow stepped out from the side of my house, near the bushes. I jumped. Gary stumbled back against his truck. Brenda let out a tiny, high-pitched squeak of terror. It was Vlad. He was wearing dark jeans and a black t-shirt, looking like a terrifying Eastern European mountain. He held a massive, heavy iron wrench in one hand. "What is happening here?" Vlad rumbled, his voice low and dangerous in the quiet night. "Vlad? What are you doing here?" I asked, genuinely shocked. "I come to check the tension on the chains," Vlad said smoothly, though I knew he was lying. He must have been sleeping in his truck down the street, keeping an eye on his masterpiece. He walked slowly toward the tow truck, one of his heavy boots crunching on the driveway. He stopped right in front of Gary. Vlad was easily 6 inches taller and 100 pounds heavier than the driver. "You put a chain on my art," Vlad said, his voice dropping an octave. He reached out and touched the tow chain wrapped around the portcullis. He looked at Gary. "You want to distort the duality? You want to mutilate my vision?" Gary swallowed hard. "No, sir, just a misunderstanding." "This is protected by the government of the United States," Vlad said, tapping the bronze plaque with his heavy wrench. Clink. "I am the artist. If you break my art, I break your truck, and then I take your money in the court. Do you understand this kinetic reality?" "I'm out," Gary said instantly. He scrambled to unhook the chain, yanking it off the iron grate. He threw the chain onto the back of the flatbed, practically dove into the cab, and started the engine. "Gary, you get back here! I paid you a deposit!" Brenda screamed, running toward the truck. Gary didn't even look back. He threw the truck into drive and sped off down the street, running the stop sign at the corner. Silence descended on the driveway again, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the heavy breathing of Brenda, who was standing alone on the sidewalk, completely exposed. I looked at her. Vlad looked at her. Marcus was still on speakerphone, chuckling softly. "Well, Brenda," I said, crossing my arms over my bathrobe. "That was embarrassing. Attempted vandalism, trespassing, conspiracy to destroy protected art. Honestly, I could call the cops right now and show them the footage of you directing that guy to tear up my driveway, but I'm not going to." She stared at me, her eyes wide, realizing the trap she had just walked into. "You're not?" "No, because having you live across the street, having to drive past this beautiful, culturally enriching Portcullis every single day, knowing that you cannot touch it, cannot fine it, and cannot legislate it away, that is a much better punishment." I stepped closer to the edge of the property line. "The ARC guidelines are subjective, Brenda, but federal law is absolute. This art stays. And if you ever try to touch it again, or if you ever send me another fine for a trash can lid or a blade of grass being too high, I will sue you personally and the HOA board into bankruptcy." Brenda looked at the portcullis. As the gargoyles seemed to be staring down at her in the moonlight, she looked defeated. Utterly, completely broken. The malicious compliance had broken her spirit. She turned around, her trench coat dragging on the grass, and walked slowly back to her house without saying a single word. Vlad patted the massive iron beam of the portcullis affectionately. "The duality has defended itself, businessman. The art is strong." "It really is, Vlad. Thanks for stopping by to check the tension." He grinned, his gold tooth flashing in the moonlight. "Always protect the masterpiece. Good night, Jack." He walked off into the darkness, a shadowy guardian of suburban metal. I walked back up to the winch. I grabbed the handle. I cranked it, the heavy clank, 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 shattering the quiet night one last time. I hoisted the portcullis up, locked the pin, and walked into my house. The next morning, I walked out, got into my Honda Civic, and backed out under the massive iron spikes. I stopped at the end of the driveway, hit the remote release I had wired into the winch, and watched as the portcullis slammed down behind me with a glorious, earth-shaking thud. I waved politely at Brenda's house, put the car in drive, and went to get coffee. And that, everyone, is how you weaponize the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990 against an overzealous HOA. If they want to play dirty with subjective rules, you don't fight them in their sandbox. You build a federal fortress right on top of it. Know your rights, read the fine print, and never underestimate the legal power of a highly motivated, slightly unhinged artist with a plasma cutter. I'll see you in the next one.